So we are now chatting. So we have now at some point officially started our teaching chat for this week. I always forget to say who I am. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. I am very excited all of you made time to come and chat about teaching today. I'll announce that next week we'll have, kind of our regularly scheduled presentations. Next week we'll be having Dr. Doris Carroll come and talk about reducing classroom microaggressions through cultural humility, which is a very important topic always, but especially with what society is doing right now. So I think that's something that we'll have some great conversations next week, and I'm very appreciative of Dr. Carroll having that conversation with us. Having said that, we are now in the third semester of the third week of the spring semester, which means that for many of us, we've had our first week of the possibility of face-to-face classes again. Myself this week, because I'm at the virtual conference with many of my students, we've kept our third week as a remote week. But next week, we start those face-to-face opportunities with our students again. We had done some polling of our students to make sure that some of them might come if we were going to be able to provide that option. And one of the things that we had done in our classroom categorization is we did not have a 100% face-to-face class in either of my classes. So for both of those, I'm offering the first half of the week is face-to-face, and then the second and a half of the week will be the remote aspect. So my Monday, Wednesday, Friday is a Monday, Wednesday face-to-face opportunity, and the Tuesday, Thursday is a Tuesday face-to-face opportunity. But my students at all point can Zoom in. We have a high flex opportunity on those days. So I'm looking forward to this. I think it's going to be awesome. Some of the rest of you have probably started this, and I was very curious to hear how those experiences were going so far in the spring semester. I know it went in the fall, but how's it going in the spring?
Brutal.
Brutal. All right, so we're starting out with not the shiny and happy. I want to hear this though. tell me about this, Andy.
So I've only had one high flex class so far, but I have a lot more students this semester than I had in the fall. And just like trying to figure out how to best manage the students. It's a seminar class with 20 students. And like, it's a lot to try to be having deep discussions about topics with that many students just in general. And then also to have half of them, about half came on Zoom and half came in the giant lecture hall that I have for my 20 students. And I found it really hard to understand anybody. Like the students in class have their mouths covered. And so I was like really straining to understand them. The sound quality in the classroom was not optimal. So I was having trouble hearing the students on Zoom. And I just felt like, like I needed one of those like old fashioned horns. Like I was a little old lady, like, hello, what? I'm sorry, can you repeat that? So I'm feeling optimistic that it'll get better, but yesterday was tough.
And adding to that, are your students speaking a second language in this class? Because you're in modern languages, right?
Yeah, so it's all in Spanish. And
okay.
and I have a mix of native Spanish speakers and non-native Spanish speakers. So it's like factors upon factors of complications.
So which building are you teaching in?
I'm in Cardwell Hall. I actually had a smaller room, but since I have 20 students, I had to, I want all the students to be able to come in person if they should so choose. So that's why I'm in the huge lecture hall, so that if everybody wanted to come in person, they would be able to. With COVID, it's challenging.
So I'm going to be in the same sort of situation. One of my classes is around 11, so we have a rather large class to let them come in. My other class is around 30. We have an even larger class to potentially allow all of them to come in at the same time. So what percentage of your class did come online in person yesterday?
It was about half.
Okay. So I'm curious about other people's experiences, as well as having to face this myself next week. What can we do to make this better than brutal?
Well, I kind of have a question with it, like in terms of etiquette / good practices, like, because I'm in a room that's capacity is actually like 80. What does it say? But like, my class is 45, according to surveys and talking to people, maybe 20 will come. But it's like, I kind of want them in a similar area but still distance, so if there's somebody way at the top, is it appropriate to be like, hey, if if you're there for social reasons, I'd like you to come down, but if it's for COVID, I get it. You know what I mean? But I still want them distance apart. But because in theory, if you're on the top right of the room, way far away, like what's the reason? And kind of isolates you a little bit. My first class is on Thursday though, so I haven't done it yet. But just curious what people's opinions are.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? Because this is something I'd kind of thought of because, anytime I've ever taught, there are some students who just want to sit in the back. They want to sit as far away from me as possible. What do we do in that situation? Because I've always invited them forward, but there's never been a COVID issue that I've had to deal with in doing so.
I think it's definitely worth encouraging them to come down to the front. If it weren't COVID and that were the situation, I think I would sort of strongly encourage, but I guess with some students sitting farther away, it may be for those reasons. So I guess all you can do is encourage them to. So I'm not actually teaching in person this spring, but I taught in person last fall, and I had a CAT community. So I had the same students Monday, Wednesday, Friday in an English class, and then on Thursdays in the connections course. And we were in different classrooms for those. And then the 3 times a week English class, it was a smaller room and I could hear everybody. And the once a week class, it was in Waters 231, which is a small lecture hall, and we couldn't hear each other. So same students and everything. And what ended up helping was that I asked students to bring laptops, and every semester I have either all or 99% of students who can bring laptops. And I asked them to bring them and have them log into Zoom, but mute and turn off audio. And then they use the chat to type. And then I read it to the rest of the class. That way, when they're in person with masks and we can't hear each other, we can also read it. And it helps some students to interact who are nervous to speak up because they can type it. And you can do the whole waterfall thing we've talked about before. And it takes a little bit of getting used to, but we could, when we couldn't hear each other, that seemed to work well. And then the people on Zoom could read the chat. And so that ended up being a pretty good technique for us to try out.
I like that idea. And this is something we did a little bit in one of my classes last semester. And we didn't have them necessarily keep their videos off either, so they could actually have some face-to-face contact with the people in home too. So just because I haven't said this to my TAs yet this semester, because we're just about to start this. So Tucker and Noah, let's invite people to bring laptops to our classes, because I really like that idea and we should continue that.
Either a laptop or an iPad. I just came from another Zoom meeting right before this one. And the young lady was having trouble with her system on her laptop. She was fading in and out, but she connected through her iPad, and it was a clearer picture because it was a new iPad, and it gave her a response. And that's exactly the way we communicated. She was a foreign student who didn't understand English as well. And even though I'd spell the person's name, I said, let me just type it into the chat. And that way you can, even if I'm gone, you can go back and finish taking your notes. So that was real helpful.
I'm noticing you're all focused on laptops and other devices. What about phones?
Yeah, phones too.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious if you felt that was too distracting, or if you did encourage people to use their phones as their mobile device as well for Zoom.
We do in our studios, because even though we give all of our students, they have to buy an iPad for our first year now as part of the requirement. A number of them may not be where their iPad is at the time of class. They may be en route, so they're on their phone. And it does limit visual, but it does at least give you audio and communication. So
we've actually also
Go ahead.
we've actually also started letting students in the studio for principles of biology use their phones if they're using it as a study device, because they're working on the computer, which they can access the same material at home, but they'll take a picture of some activity they just did that they got approval from us that they were correct. So they'll take a picture of how it should look, or they'll take a picture through the microscope with their phone. Instead of trying to draw it. So they actually are they'll take notes on their phones. So they're using their phones now as study devices, just as much as they are as a distraction.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that in this environment, whatever kind of way we can communicate, I strongly encourage that. And so I'll have students, I have a lot of students that will take pictures of their homework now. Usually they would just like complete a Word document. And I've said, like, I understand you guys are on the computer all the time. And I totally get that you might be sick of staring at your screen. If you want to write your homework out by hand and take a picture, I'm fine with that. And I have not a lot of students who do that, but more than I expected. I have at least probably 5 students per class that will write their responses out by hand and take a picture and send it in that way. So, I feel like whatever gets them engaged and feeling like they have control over their learning, I'm all for it.
I'm loving the flexibility that I'm kind of hearing here, because the things that I would allow in class, pre-COVID are going to be different now. I'm assuming that especially if I'm giving a choice, that you come to face-to-face or you can stay at home, that the students who are most likely to be kind of distracted and do other things are probably just going to stay at home rather than kind of come into the classroom and do that. My tech policy has always been you can use tech, but it's got to be for learning purposes. And it sounds like that this is something they're conversant in now. So I really like this idea of kind of keeping them connected. One of you had put in the chat, and I just wanted to raise this because I thought this was really clever, is it's kind of using the Aldi cookies to get them to come down to the front and give them like a prepackaged whole box, and you'll only have to do it once because they'll keep coming the rest of the time. Kind of doing this. If you need continuous reinforcement, that's not the most stable. So these kind of variable interval or variable ratio kind of reinforcement schedules are better for maintaining behavior anyway. So I really like that in the chat. Intermittent reinforcement, as Melissa just said. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not sure. This was the other thing I was going to say, that the tech in my classroom is going to be the most distracting thing. There are so many other things going on. The masks. I've really kind of struggled with a couple of things about my mask, and I'm kind of curious about this, and I don't know if this is too basic a thing, but I found that the gaiters, they don't work for me. They just get so wet. They're gross. I don't like it. The other masks muffle me a lot. What I've been doing is kind of the more like surgical kind of cup mask that provides a little air over my face that I can kind of talk a little bit more. I don't like that you can't like personalize them quite as much. I kind of like the other masks. You get to add a little personality and create a little community and authenticity to your class by wearing those. But I'm just kind of wondering what your kind of mask experience have been. And also, as one of you said, like, we're not supposed to eat and drink in the class. I have a really hard time without water, especially for a 75-minute class. And I was kind of wondering what people's strategies were with this.
Oh, I drink water. I will like flip up my mask, and like I have just like, one of these water bottles with the little spout, and I'll take water. I have a little visor too, so I'll like put on the visor so I can like sip water as quick as possible and trying to be safe. But I absolutely, I'll lose my voice if I don't drink water during the class. And so I feel like if we have to drink a little water now and again, then so be it. I might get in trouble for saying that. I realize that now that this is recording, so I might.
You're only speaking in the abstract and hypotheticals, so it's all good. We're just brainstorming ideas here. It's all good.
I say I started double masking now, and actually I use a surgical mask and then my fabric masks, and actually that works better than just the fabric mask because the surgical doesn't get wet and doesn't stick to you as much. And so it kind of keeps the fabric off, but then it keeps it tight by putting the fabric one on. And then yesterday, I also don't drink water, and I have 2 75-minute classes back to back. So I just put like, this is maybe very girlish, but I put lip salve on and then put my masks on, and that actually kept some moisture in my mask. So I wasn't as, like my throat wasn't getting as parched while I was talking in class. It seemed to work. We'll see if it keeps working, but since it's so cold and dry out, I thought that was pretty good this week that I could do that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's why with a 2.5, 3-hour studio, it's very difficult to manage that. Your lips get really dry and you can step out, but that means you have to step out of the building into 9-degree temperatures once to do that. But the other thing I thought about is a straw is a maybe easier way to sip water. Also, according to my mother, the nurse, is actually a healthier way to get it into the mouth anyway. So there's different ways of thinking about tipping that bottle up and where it's been exposed to air as opposed to a straw that can be inserted and taken out and used. So I think that there are some ways to do that gracefully. I was going to go back to something I think, Melissa, you or Andy were talking about when you have a room with people spread out a lot. If you have a mic, walk between them. If it's tiered, you can go up straight up to that person who's sitting at the very end and talk to them, but the mic will carry the whole room. So you can find ways of being very upfront and personal with people who want to sit further away, but yet walking also gives you a chance to be sort of in a sphere with students who want to be further away. And it feels more personal to them that you're speaking directly to them. So if you're in a big hall, use the space to walk. It also cuts back on my nervous energy if I can move a bit. But that's just something to think about so that they don't feel totally isolated and so far away. It's to bridge the gap.
I use a face shield when teaching. At least I know that was approved when we first started going. I don't know if that's changed, but that was one that was provided by our department. And for me, I like it better so they can actually see my face. There's less muffling. And then as soon as I teach 3 50-minute class back to back, I'll switch over to the mask as I go and spray down the desks and then go back to this when I teach. And this makes it a little bit easy to take a little bit of sip underneath it because I have to as well. It's just that there's no way I could go 3 hours without getting a drink.
Yeah, I think those are great ideas. The face shield I haven't been as comfortable with myself for a variety of reasons. So I'm still going to kind of use the mask. The issue that I have, and you've seen examples of this now, is without the mask, I sometimes talk too fast, get excited, mumble, and eat some words. So it's really kind of caused me to have to be much more clearer in how I articulate and how I project my language, which is something that it's been a challenge my entire teaching career because I just want to go. I just want to do the stuff. I want to tell you everything. So I think in that way, it's been helpful, but I find that I get so distracted. Like if a student brings coffee and sips the coffee, I will get so distracted about, am I supposed to intervene in that? Is that okay? You know, those kind of things. That student's not sitting in a stickered seat, I don't think. Do I need to move the student? There are so many additional things that I'm attending to in the face-to-face classroom that didn't previously, use my cortex. And I just find that I struggle with keeping all of it, all those balls in the air. And I was wondering if anyone had those issues too, and if they had solutions to those issues.
No, and I do have a question for you because I'm the same way that I'm like a rocket. As soon as I get in the room, I'm just ready to go. And I have to slow down. But I guess the question is, does it impinge or obscure your thought process to slow down because you're also slowing your speech down, and that can cause those distractions to be more obvious for you as well. And so one of the things that my department head said to me was, for the first 3 minutes, slow down. If you can't maintain that, at least give them the opening in a slower pace. And then if you're going to take off, it's a little bit easier to do that. But it is very difficult, I think, when you're showing enthusiasm for a subject and you want your students to be inspired and excited about it, as opposed to slowing down to the point that they fall asleep. I mean, there's a balance in there mentally for you and for them. And I find it really difficult. So for me, I'll use imagery to help me stay at a regular pace rather than to just run off the rails. Mm-hmm. And that forces me to stay on point and not be distracted by the things happening in the room.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great point. As you're saying it, I will agree. It's when I make the conscious efforts to slow down, that's when I have more time and attention to devote to being distracted to other things. So that I'm glad you said that, because I don't think I was aware of that before.
And the other thing you can do is props. I find pastors do it more and more today. They'll bring something to the pulpit that they can focus on as an example. But having a prop sometimes focuses a little bit more as you talk and keeps you on track. And so you want to talk about that before you move to the next thing. But it is a difficult thing for me as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
What do the rest of y'all think? What are the rest of y'all doing about these issues?
I
Or
don't
not
have
having
any
these issues at first at all? Go ahead, Andy. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I don't have any solutions, but just to kind of commiserate here, I found myself in the same situation yesterday. Like, you know, at the beginning of class, before when everyone was coming in and sitting down, I directed them to, you know, where there were stickers and kind of like explained how the classroom worked. And then during class, you know, my teaching style is that I always have students working collaboratively in groups. And I think that that's been one of the hardest adjustments that I've experienced, is like, how do I continue to teach in my style of teaching when there's all these obstacles in the way? And so I had them do group discussions, and I, you know, kind of blocked off for the students who were in class, you know, I said, like, this section here and this section here, have a conversation. And a couple of them moved just, you know, a seat over to get just a little bit closer so that they weren't having to yell quite as much. They were still, you know, it was clear that they were trying to, you know, maintain some amount of distance and be careful, but they were definitely not in the seats that they were supposed to be in. And I found myself being like, okay, do I say something? Do I let them keep doing this? Like how, and I don't know. So I'm just feeling stuck with like how to get my students continuing to have that group work and still be safe and following rules. So I don't have solutions, just more questions.
Well, and we talked about it before, but if they have an iPad or another device, you can put them then in breakout rooms. Even though they're in the room, they see each other while they're talking, but the clarity of being in a group and not having to move them or have them move might be a solution.
So one issue with that, and we did a test run of this last summer. I think, Melissa, you were part of that test run. We went into a room in Bluemont, and it was me and Melissa and Dave Ellington and Greg Eislein and Tom Sumriento and a few others. And the ambient noise when we were doing socially distanced stuff, like just even if we're doing it in a break room, it is so loud. And you had to spend so much energy trying to focus only on the person that was talking in your group. And you were naturally kind of doing what Andy was saying. We were getting closer to each other, even though we weren't supposed to. So I do struggle with that a little bit, because as Clarissa said, you know, one of the cool things is that maybe if we can't drink water, we'll let our students do more of the talking. We'll do more of that contribution. But that creates its own set of challenges, as we're discovering. So now I'm gonna figure this out in my classes, and I'm probably gonna do things that aren't all the ways letter of the law legal. I'm gonna try, and safety is always first. But I would imagine there are gonna be some things that I'm gonna say, you know what, it's a calculated risk, and we're going here. I know one professor on campus that has their students sign a waiver, and he understands it's not legally binding, that hey, in this class we're not gonna have social distancing. You know, wear your mask, but we're probably going to be too close, but we're doing it because we're learning, and here we go. I'm not advocating that. Please understand that. This is on the recording, Tucker. I'm not advocating we do that. But I am saying that there are people who are saying, you know, the learning is important, and they're coming to the face-to-face classes by choice, right? It's a situation like Brandon said in the chat, truly high flex. We've got the synchronous in person, the synchronous on Zoom, and the asynchronous watching it later. And if you're choosing to come to class, some students are doing it because they crave some of these things we can do in class. And I think there's going to be a balancing act that we're trying to do, but I'm not a CDC safety expert. I'm a professor. And, you know, it's kind of what I know and what I do. And I'm going to try to do some approximation what I've always done. And I did not move my students back to their seats this past fall. They only were moving that one seat over. When the activity ended, they moved back. They kept their masks on, you know, those kind of things. And I'm struggling with some of the kind of stuff, but it's hard, you know. And I had a colleague tell me, you know, what's the difference between 5 feet and 7 feet? Like, is it really that much safer than, you know, 6 or whatever that is? You know, Brandon kind of articulated the face shield rules are confusing, right? You can wear the face shield if you can maintain this distance from the rest of your class, but if you can't, you have to wear the mask under the face shield and those kind of things. It's hard, and a lot of these things appear arbitrary. There was pushback this semester on whether or not we should spray the classrooms based on some of the data that's being reported. And right now, by the way, our campus policy is we're still spraying the classrooms until CDC gives different recommendations. But all of this is hard. And navigating these challenges in a way that our students can get something valuable from the experience, I think, is important. People were talking about in the chat about, is this something students are responding well to? I've found, for instance, last semester that my high flex classes were not as successful as my classes that were purely online. They can engage more in the classes that are purely online. It was funny because they said they want to have the face-to-face, they want to have the face-to-face. We learned better online because there were no masks. We were all able to see each other closer. It was easier to hear each other. You didn't have me be muffled by my mask, and they learned more, you know, in that kind of part. So part of me is terrified in 3 weeks, all my classes are going to be back to online classes because we couldn't pull it off face-to-face. But we're going to give it the shot. And I apologize for ranting for like 10 minutes there.
You know, Don, I was just going to say, does anybody have a stopwatch? Because I think they tell you how much time you can stay within a sphere of someone before you're actually vulnerable. So if your activity is a certain limit of time, then you ought to be okay. I mean, like, you know, that forces us to, because the rule keeps changing from CDC, you got to keep up with it and then, you know, try to manage it the best way we can.
I don't know if this would work for other people in their classrooms, but so my classroom is, I only have 24 tables and there's one chair at each table. And right now it's full. Like as many students as can get in there are in there, and then the rest are all online. And I asked the in-class students, do you want to work in small groups with people online by going on Zoom and working in breakout rooms, or do you want to work together and just kind of face the person near you and make a little group? And every time the students in class have always wanted to just work with the other people in class, but I think that's reduced some of the noise instead of having them all shouting on Zoom at each other. But also maybe because we have tables, they don't really move, so they're not getting closer together, but they are able to at least see their neighbors. And since they tend to sit in the same seats, they're getting to know at least a few students in that class over the semester if they keep coming. And even when they don't, they at least still talk to each other and work in groups then on Zoom later in the semester, at least last semester when people were coming more online than in class.
That just reminded me, I did at one point last semester, I had students for a group activity. I used the Canvas discussion board, but in real time. So I put them in groups and then had them post their discussions, which I found works, it helps organize the information better than with the chat function, where you can easily like lose comments and you're like, wait, what did that person say? And then they, as a group, could like, you know, post their response to a certain idea and then respond to what other groups said. And it was a little bit clunky, but I think it has a lot of potential. And so I might bring that back and try incorporating that again this semester.
We use that technique in our pop culture class this year because it's so much about discussion and interpretation of music and film. And it worked fairly well. We decided we weren't going to try to monitor that very much because those comments come in so quickly if they're required to do it. We let them have the conversation. And when that conversation was over, we went back and read it rather than trying to infuse our comments in between other people's comments. Just got away from us. But we found it to be quite useful.
And it allows for sharing images and things like of that nature too, which can be useful depending on what the topic is.
Yeah.
Has anyone experimented with using Microsoft Teams to accomplish the same type of thing?
I have. I use it with my freshmen. We post everything there. And I go back and upload the files and then posting. So we've used that.
And you use the chat room as part of like in-class discussion or out of class, and that's worked well?
I've used it mostly for out of class. I haven't used it for in class because I really don't want them confused between several different ways we communicate. So I have my class communicate with GroupMe because as freshmen, they know that platform. They'll use that. If I start introducing a second or a third communication, I don't know where to look for their comment or their questions. So I've tried to limit what they do, but my department uses Teams. We use it for both chat, for our chat rather than email now. So it's very useful. I found it to be quite good, and it does keep record of your conversation in the thread. You don't have to guess where things are. Yeah.
It does keep record, but do I remember correctly that it goes away after, is it 30 days or something?
I think you can adjust how fast it does though.
That's the one thing we've had discussions about, especially in the office, is, you know, if this is something I need to search for 6 months later, send it to me in an email. And if it's a, you know, a quick conversation, we use the chat in Teams.
GroupMe doesn't. I've got all my chats from 2 years ago with my group students, and I keep them so that if I'm trying to find an upper level student, I still have a way to reach that student rather than to go through email because they respond faster to GroupMe for some reason. So I tell them, don't disengage from your GroupMe for your class, especially our freshmen who then choose different disciplines in our college. So this is a way for them to keep their community going from their freshman year and keep up with people who have changed disciplines or moved on to something else in a different college.
So I like the idea of all these tech options, as Clarissa noted in the chat.
Mhm.
It's hard for us to keep on track of them. It's probably hard for our students to stay on top of them as well, having to learn different technology and different modalities for our classes. One of the things that I think is important, and you've heard me say this before, I'm sure, is that, you know, any challenge that we put on our students, we have to support them through. So if we're going to be using a technology that might be foreign to them, providing some easy way for them to kind of pick it up, you know, some guidance on that is going to be important. And then, and this is something that has been an issue at the university for a long time, if we're going to have our students learn the technology, we have to actually then use the technology. There have been a lot of cases where people would have students either learn or purchase technology and then not make it a large part of the class, to the extent that our Student Governing Association actually made a resolution that people need to stop doing that. You know, if you're going to make us use the technology, then make it a part of the class. So just kind of be hesitant for that. I was having a kind of offline discussion with one of you about kind of experimenting in class, and some classes might be good for experimentation. For instance, I teach a principles of college teaching class. That class is great for experimentation. We can try things and say we're trying things. But you know, my Psych 100 class might not be a place where I'm just going to try a whole bunch of stuff and see what sticks. So just kind of think about, you know, what's going to service your students best, and then support them through that experience too, because they're struggling. And I also wanted to point out that a recommendation that Andy Thompson had made, I believe at the end of last semester, when he was kind of talking about servicing students where they are and following through on the promise of support, I think is what he called it, is he had recommended that when you get that COVID email from Office of Student Life saying the students in isolation or in quarantine, you know, just have this little form letter email that doesn't sound like a form letter, that just says, "Hey, Ashley, I heard you're in isolation. I really hope you're doing well. Please reach out if there's anything I do to help you in the class." And just, you know, have that, you can copy paste to any student. I've done that, and I was kind of embarrassed that I hadn't thought to do that before. And that has been really well received by the students that I've unfortunately had to send that email to. It's a real small gesture. It's a real small kind of notion of support. And if you're not already doing that, I highly recommend you do that. My students have been really appreciative. And several of them said, "You're the only person who's checked on me." And you know, if there's only going to be one, it might as well be you.
I think, Tucker, the other thing is that sometimes it doesn't come to you that way. For instance, if a student is exposed to someone and they've gotten a negative response, or they haven't gotten a response for their test, and they're saying to you, "I wasn't in class because I am quarantining," at least reaching back out to that student to say, I understand. Let me know when you have received your test results, because that doesn't necessarily come through the system in the same notification way, but at least you know why the student wasn't in studio or did not respond on Zoom. And they do really appreciate that, and letting them know, here's what you missed, just taking that extra time to share, not the whole class period they missed, but enough that they can feel like they can keep up is really important.
So in kind of continuing this theme, what kind of things have you done that you have had a lot of success with in supporting your students through this time in a way that is also emotionally fair and reasonable for you to do? One of the things that I think is important is that we're not taking on so much on ourselves, that we are not employing all the self-care that I think LB did a really nice job recently telling us about. So what have you done that's been kind of efficient and reasonable for you to really support your students?
Those cookies are fun. I, I, that's a new one. I'll have
Come
to,
back around.
yeah, I'm gonna have to remember that. I usually, at a time, because we have studios and so they have fixed desks, I try to come in on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning when none of them are there, and I might leave them a treat and a little note on their desk, just to say, because I teach on Zoom, so they don't see me in the room. So I make sure it's a time when I'm not exposing them and they're not exposing me, but I just leave them something that lets them know I'm thinking about them and I have been there in the room where their desk is. And the first day of class, I do a similar thing. I assign their desk and I leave them a personal note based on their photograph. And they just love that. I come back and they still have it up there on their desk. They didn't remove it. And so it's just a personalized way to say, hey, I'm seeing you as an individual. I used to cook, but I can't do that. I used to bring them apple crisp or peach cobbler, or I'd bring them if they were up all night. When we didn't have COVID, I would make sure they were eating well. So I'd bring them fruit and a vegetable tray and a bunch of food and say, eat this. I know you're going to be up. You're not going to get enough sleep, but don't burn both ends of the candle. So here, and they really, really appreciated that. And the other thing they did, because there was another class in that same studio, they would share. And I thought that was wonderful that they knew to invite the group of students that weren't in their class over to partake and take a little break. So I'm going to be looking for ways to do that this semester, even though I can't be there and it's not individually wrapped. So fun.
I love that, Barbara. I love bringing food to my students too, and missed doing that this past fall. Although we did go to Call Hall a couple times and eat outside, and I called ahead with the students' orders. So I went inside, everybody else stayed outside, brought the box out, and it was great. But I love that you do that for your students. I was thinking of another way of doing this, even if I don't have very many students, but I know a lot of you have hundreds. Something I did actually last spring more than last fall, because it was suddenly and unexpectedly everything online, goodbye, never see you again in person kind of thing. I use GroupMe for this, but you could use any format. I sent students 30-second video clips just to them as a class saying, hi, how are you doing? And if I would go for a walk, I would take a video of myself out on Linear Trail and say, hey, I'm going for a walk and I'm thinking of you. I hope you're outside taking a walk sometime. So it was kind of this modeling, Don would say trickle down self-care kind of thing, where I would do something to take care of myself and encourage them to do the same. And it was just that personal touch. And since it was 30 seconds long, I didn't edit it. I didn't worry about mistakes. Students actually watched them because they looked at the time and said, oh, 30 seconds, I'll watch that video. So that was a really quick, easy thing to do that you could reach a lot of students really quickly and easily too. I also, in terms of food, this would definitely be more involved, but a friend of mine was attending a virtual conference and was so excited that the people organizing the conference had done this thing where they invited all attendees to order snacks that would be delivered to their house. So she said, it's ridiculous how excited I am about having snacks delivered to my house, but usually food is a part of conferences. So I don't know what format those conference organizers use, but if you wanted to get food to your students, there's probably something out there where some sort of pick out a snack and have a delivered option could be available. So, but I thought that was really cool too.
I think the point of that is that we're seeing our students as individuals and we're giving them as individual persons our understanding of who they are as unique people. And I think that's where it really plays out. No matter what you do, is that you at least send that message to them, whatever it is.
One thing that I done this semester because of the high flex and knowing that a lot of my students were still going to participate via Zoom is I made a concerted effort I made one of the early assignments. This is an assignment that was due before like the first day of class, was they needed to send me a selfie, like a better picture than what's on the photo roster. 2, I gave them instructions on how to update their Zoom profile, and said, you need to go in and put your photo in there and then give me a screenshot showing that you've put it in there. And it's been great because now like 95% of my class actually have a face that I'm looking at, even if it's just a photo, which is made a difference. At least lets them know I like to see your face. I wish we were in person, but if we're not, I want at least to be able to, some future time when we're walking down the halls and we're both not wearing masks, I'll recognize you and knew you were in my class, because that's been a challenge the last year.
Brandon, I'm going to take that further. Jan told me this very same thing you're talking about of getting a selfie. So what I do with my community development class is I ask them to go find a community development project in the background and take a selfie in front of it. So it's about our subject for the course. And then they send them to me and I put them into a collage and label it my community development. That's our community. And I put little phrases in, and by the next class, I show them all of them. And whether we're online or in person, you can do that. And they get to see their whole classmates, all of them in this collage format. And that I got from Jan years ago. And I really like it as an introduction to the class and to say, do you really know what community development is back behind you? What do you think it is based on the definition I give them the first day of class? So go another step, put them all together. Yep, fun. Does anybody else have other ways?
I mean, I think that one of the things that I've been working on is just in terms of like content of the course, because I've just been astounded at how much longer it takes to do everything in class with the way that we, so, you know, like what I would normally cover in a class is just not, it's not reasonable, you know? And so I think that I've been doing a lot of work of just, you know, really looking at what I want my students to know and highlighting, okay, this is what's really important about today's class. This is what I want them at the end of class. This is what I want them to know. And everything else, it's like, it's getting tossed out. Instead of, you know, some things that I would normally have the students really spend some time discussing, I'll just reduce it down. I'll give them like, this is what I want you to know about this topic. So I would love to be able to do more discussion, but sometimes it's just about getting them like, here's what's important. Here's what you need to know. And taking more time to do some of the discussion in other formats. So, you know, before coming to class or after having class in the homework. So I think that, you know, thinking about what your expectations are in terms of content and making sure that you're not asking an obscene amount from your students.
I'm going to go back to something Don said, and I've heard before. When you do that, that reduces your stress because you've got to grade it. So it's helpful not to overload them because you're going to end up being overloaded yourself. And if you're trying to look for personal time outside of work, that's your mental break as well. So it's healthy both ways.
Clarissa just put in the chat that she's doing something similar to Andy's doing, but also tell them what to focus on the reading and what they can ignore each week. And I think that kind of guidance is really important, because I know that my students, the stuff they do with me, I can shepherd them through. But the stuff they do independently, that's where a lot of their stress comes from. And I think kind of letting them know, hey, like speaking from my perspective, you're going to read this article, but the stats are really hard. So focus more on the setup and the intro, and then the discussion of the conclusions, than trying to figure out stats that you're not familiar with. So providing some of that guidance, I think, could be really helpful too, if we can anticipate those kind of things coming up.
Oh.
One of the things that we're doing is in my classes, I'm assigning less reading than I had before. I'm just understanding that, you know what, the textbook is great and I wish you could read it, but we're not going to do that. We're going to show you short videos instead. You know, we used to have 5 articles, we're going to have 2. And I think focusing on the quality and the depth is probably really good right now. And this is something that, you know, right when we moved to the remote operations and the emergency mode after spring break, I started telling everyone, you know, streamline and prioritize. That's something we should always do. You know, I think streamlining and prioritizing, you know, is important. It's not covering more, it's covering better. And there's been a cliche that I picked up at the Wakunzi teaching conference a long time ago, and it's teach less better. And you got to kind of say it right. You can read it wrong and it'd be bad, but if you teach less better, it's probably going to be better for your students.
I just want to second what you were saying, Dawn, about the how to read things. I think we should be really communicate that well to students. We can do that even online, even if you're teaching online only, not just telling them, but you can show what the focus is of that article. You know, in this article, focus on this. This is what I want you to get out of this. You can give them guiding questions that they ask themselves as they're reading through it. So I think that's a really great tool to use.
I started doing this a couple years ago with my students, and it is like, I am just floored at how effective it is to, because not only am I telling students like, okay, I want you to read, you know, this short 2-page article, but I want you to read it 2 times over, once, you know, just reading through it, getting the content, and then read it again, but really critically, like don't agree with what the author's saying, or, you know, like just telling them how to read what I'm asking them to read, or I just want you to skim this for main ideas. That when I do that, you see that students, not only are they getting the information better and but they're thinking about, there's not just one way to read something. You know, it's not just pass your eyes over the text and, you know, get an idea of what it's talking about, but you can interact with texts in different ways. And it's something that I've been doing more and more, and I'm really astounded with how much it helps students in preparing for class.
It's important too, when you're talking about written communication, that you choose those verbs wisely. Like you're saying, skim, read, review, you know, what do they really need to do that? Or we tend to say, read this article over and over again, or watch this video over and over again. And those are the only verbs we use, instead of really telling them what we're expecting them.
And I like the idea that Melissa put in the chat, that when we're giving them this kind of guidance, one of the things we can do is have them actually come up with the discussion questions that they want to talk about those articles. And I know sometimes it might be the method that's the most important thing we want to talk about. It might be an interesting result. It might be the theory or the lack of support for a theory. But letting them kind of come up with, you know, I ask this all the time, why did I assign this? And then give them answers. And sometimes their answers are better than anything I anticipated. And that's really kind of a cool thing, to kind of have your students take some independence and some autonomy and some guidance of their own educations, because that's where a lot of the joy and fulfillment comes from, is seeing our students actually teach us on those occasions. So that's awesome.
A completely different question, but it has to do with distance and COVID. So I have, unfortunately, I have an honor and integrity hearing tomorrow with a student from the fall. It's a alleged plagiarism. And so I'm just wondering if any of you have done this virtually in terms of some sort of hearing, because normally you'd be in a room with the person. So I'm thinking in terms of student relationships and just navigating that space. And I know the Honor Council has a lot of practice doing that, so I'm not worried about it. But at the same time, this is a student I haven't seen since November. We've only communicated over email. And so I want it to be, regardless of the outcome, I want it to be a positive experience. So if any of you have any ideas or experience, I would welcome hearing that.
I haven't. I will say I've been involved in them prior to COVID. I would say that none of them were positive experiences for anyone. I don't think anyone comes out of those hearings feeling good. And I was there to defend a student against an honor and integrity violation, and she lost. And it was the only time that year that the decision was reversed on appeal. So this was, no one felt good about this. I mean, it was one of those where the decision went both ways in a pretty short period of time. And another time I can tell you about the parts of the case that I can reveal, but it was a very unusual situation, and no one felt good. I don't think it's ever a situation where we say, "Oh, that's great, you cheated, that's awesome," or "You were accused of cheating, but you didn't." I mean, there's no way it's going to go well. But I think as long as you're aware that there's a person in there, because a lot of times we treat these very academically. There's a puzzle to be solved. What happened and what's the outcome? And realizing there's people involved in this, and there's people who may have made bad decisions. There are people who may have suffered from a miscommunication or just kind of inferred something that they shouldn't have inferred. Just kind of realizing there's a person, I think that's part of it, because especially over Zoom, I think a lot of the humanity gets lost. And I apologize for this, but I just had to. And hopefully during the judicial hearing you're in, there's not a cat filter over the person being kind of tried.
Honestly, I should probably try to find a cat filter and start it that way, but I won't.
I haven't had an experience with those type of hearings here, but prior to getting to higher education in business, I've had plenty of times where I've had to fire people. And for me, what I found, because I like to have that type of connection, and particularly most of the people I was working with were younger kids, and I wanted them to use that as a learning moment, was the actual event usually does need to be a little bit more clinical, and you just kind of focus on it. But then I'd always reach out and say, like, "Hey, I'd love to chat with you afterwards. And this is off the record. This is not me, manager. This is me just as a friend and the relationship we've had," and then just kind of discuss about it and try to put some perspective on it and say, "Here's some things I hope you learn from it." And some of them don't want to talk to you, but the few that do, you can usually have a good discussion that both of you leave kind of with knowing that you at least respect each other as individuals, and they can at least see it from your eyes as to why you felt like this was something that had to happen.
That's one of the things that when I've had cases like this in the past, students who have committed honor code violations, one of the things when I first communicate with them is to tell them that, we all make mistakes. We all have lapses in judgment. And that is something that is very human and very normal. It's what we do next that defines who we are. And so that's something that I think is really important, is to, it's a way that I show my students that look, I'm not going to think of you differently. I'm not, thinking that you're a horrible person because you did this. I understand that sometimes you make bad choices in life. So what are you going to do now? And let's figure out how we can move past this.
I think it's a really cool perspective, Andy, and I think your students benefit from having that perspective. I think a lot of people come into that contentiously. And I think what you're doing is a much healthier way to approach that for everybody involved. So I thank you for sharing that. I have not heard that before, unfortunately, in a lot of ways people come at this. So
yes, thank you all for those ideas and suggestions. That's really helpful. I think what's hard for me about this case is it is a case of, I believe the student didn't write his own paper. I've had other people look at it, but it's not a court of law, so this is not a matter of proof. But the student just says, "You just don't believe me," and so it's hard to navigate those waters a little bit and just say, you're right. I don't think it's your work. But I appreciate that idea of reaching out afterwards and focusing on, it's a learning moment, and that it may not be a positive case, but afterwards the idea of reaching out and talking about, this isn't a, this is separate from who I think you are. This is one instance of who you are, and I have all these other positive things. So I appreciate that. My daughter's saying hi.
So we are out of time in our teaching chat this week. So I want to thank all of you for sharing time. I've learned a lot from you today. I really think these discussions are important. Next week, I'll announce again at noon on Wednesday, we'll have Dr. Doris Carroll presenting on reducing classroom microaggressions through cultural humility. I expect that's going to be a wonderful conversation. I expect to learn a lot then too. So until next week, well, I'll see some of you before then, but until next week, thank you so much for coming, and have a great rest of your day.